guys, welcome back to Duran Woodworking Designs. This is the second part in a three-part series we're doing on making a basic cutting board. In this video I'll be teaching you guys how I like to sand and apply the different oils and wax finishes, as well as putting the feet on the cutting boards. So this video is actually more oriented towards the beginning woodworker that's never made their first cutting board. It's very simple that anybody can make at home in their own garage. It doesn't take a whole lot of tools or anything special to make it. So you can do this in your garage really simply in one day. So follow along and I will show you guys the way I like to sand and finish in cutting boards. The one last thing I'd like to mention is that all the products that we use in this particular video, we will link down in the description, because those are the ones that I stand behind and the ones that I use a lot here in the shop. I'm not sponsored in any way by any of these companies. I don't even get affiliate links or nothing like that. These are the products that I use almost every day in the shop. So thank you guys for following along, and we'll get into it. Okay, so let's talk about sanding. We all know it's one of the most labor-intensive parts of every project. It can make or break any project, so it's important to get it right. Along my journey, I have tried every single implement I could find to help me make things easier and faster. But at the end of the day, you got to find out what works for you the best, and the tools and the types of grits of sandpaper and sanders you like the best. But I can show you some examples of some of the stuff that I bought over the years and the ones that I prefer the most. They have anything from these little sanding pencils, looks like a big Q-tip, Rockler. This came from Rockler. It's a little detail sander, can help you get in some contours and also some tight areas. And the one I really prefer for getting my juice grooves is these little rubber pads that you can just wrap a piece of sandpaper around them and you can hold it, and it helps you get in the juice groove really well. They have all different angles and sizes if you have a corner you need to get to, or an area that's hard to reach, or if you have a flat area. So it's flexible, you can get into just about any areas. But the ones I seem to lean on the most are this little mouse pad sander. It reminds me of a mouse, so that's why I call it the mouse sander. And these little flexible, I believe they're made by Gator, and they're available at Lowe's. These have been the one I've used the most. If you don't want to spend a bunch of money, this is one I made just out of a 2x4, cut down with I made a little handle. This was a 10-minute deal. Some double-sided tape or some spray adhesive, and you can make these in different grits and just switch as you go. And these work really well, and they actually are very flat, and you don't have to worry about accidentally putting a belly in your project. So the sanders I use the Dremel tool for getting in some of those really small areas, and with those I use these little sanding wheels. They're also available on Amazon. They're available in grits from 120 grit all the way up to 400, and they really help get into some tight areas. Get some of those burrs off when you're CNC carving, and they've been a huge help. And sometimes when you have really tight areas, I'll use little wheels like this that are made for the Dremel, and they're also available on Amazon. I think these are 120 grit, and I usually just use them when I have fine lines and details where I need to get in there really close. Other than that, my two go-to sanders is the DeWalt orbital sander, and ordinarily I'd hook it to my dust control or my dust collector, but for the video and the noise I just put the filter bag back on there. And this little Ryobi mouse sander, sometimes you have some tight corners you need to get into, and that point comes in handy. I'm going to be honest with you, Ryobi is not my favorite. This is not my favorite sander, but it does help sometimes when you don't have any other options. So I'll show you how I usually start off the boards, and we'll kind of walk through it. I'm not going to sit here and go through 6 hours of sanding with you guys. I'm just going to show you the key points to remember, and when we get it all wrapped up, I'll show you how I treat the boards, get them ready to go to the customer. Okay, so I'm going to quickly walk you guys how I like to sand my cutting boards. important to note that I'm just going to show you guys my basic techniques. I'm not going to sit here and stand on this board for a couple hours to show you guys exactly every step of the way, but just y'all know some of the tools that I like to use and how I like to do it. The first thing I like to do is I like to start off with my mouse sander, and I'll hit the edges where I made a chamfer just to make sure there was no chip out from when I made that profile toolpath. And just I won't worry about getting it 100% now, just want to make sure there's no areas that could chip out. So I'll hit all 4 edges just real quick to make sure any burrs or splinters or anything are out of the way. I'm not worried about getting it perfect. I just want to make sure there's nothing that could get bumped or knocked into something and it can cause a tear out situation. So just a couple quick passes with that on all 4 edges, and we can move on to our next step. The next step, I like to start with the juice groove on the board with the little rubber pad I showed you guys. One thing I talked about earlier is make sure your sandpaper is slightly shorter than the sanding pad, and the reason for that is when you're sanding your juice groove, when you're sanding one way, when you come back, if your sandpaper is too long, it can hang off the back and actually cause it to scratch the back side of your board. So I generally speaking like to have it just a hair shorter, and I'll clean up one side really good, then I'll come to the other edge and I'll get it nice and cleaned up, however many passes it takes to get it to where you don't see any imperfections whatsoever. And then I'll turn the board over the other way and I'll get that last little bit, ensuring that I'm not scratching the back of my board. I can't tell you how many boards I scratched that way before I started doing it this way. So you'll hit both of those. And like I said, I always like to go on the cross grain sections first, and then I'll turn the board and I'll do the exact same thing on the other edges. I'll just hit a few passes until everything cleans up that way on both edges. And then I'll do the other side. Like I said, it's going to take you a little bit longer when you're doing it yourself, but I'm just trying to show you my technique for now. So I'll turn the board and I'll get that last little bit, making sure you're getting those corners really good. To get any scratches you make, that way you're getting any scratches you made when you're coming across the grain, you want to get them out while you're sanding with the long grain section. Same thing on the other side, you just want to hit that last little bit you missed. So from there, once you have that, I usually like to stick with 1 grit at a time. Granted, if you're making a regular cutting board, you don't have all this detail. So I like to do my juice grooves and the face of the board with the same grit, and then I'll switch to from 120 to 150, then 180, and then 220. Once I get to 220, I get everything sanded at 220. I will blow the board off really good with some compressed air. I'll take a wet rag and wipe the board down really well. It kind of helps raise the grain a little bit. Then I'll give it a good sanding with 220 one more time by hand. After that, it'll go in our treatment. When we get to that point, I get everything sanded up. I'll show you guys what I do from there. Alright guys, now that we got it all sanded down to 120 grit, I'm just going to repeat the same process I did before. I'm just going to lightly mark it with a pencil. And one thing that I like to do, the higher the grit I go, the less hard I make the pencil mark. Like I said, just put enough marks just to cover everything. That way you can make sure you're sanding everything nice and smooth. So I'll change out my grit on my sandpaper, and we'll be just continue the process until we get it to where it's up to about 220 grit. this cutting board sanded down to about 220 grit sandpaper. Everything's looking good and smooth. We've already sprayed it down with a little bit of water, but all you got to do is just take a little spray bottle, spritz a little bit of water on there, and just wipe it down. And make sure you're getting all the cracks and crevices, the end grain, everywhere. And what's that's going to do, it's going to help you raise the grain. Once you sand to a certain point, it gets really smooth, but once you add a little bit of water to it, it's going to help raise any unevenness in the grain. And once you get to that point, the water will raise the grain. You'll let the board dry again, and we'll just simply lightly sand it with 220 grit sandpaper. You don't want to be too aggressive. You just want to lightly hand sand it with 220 grit sandpaper, like I said, and it'll make things very smooth. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and we'll finish wetting everything down. We already wet it one time, but I'm going to hit it one more time just to make sure everything raises really good. And we'll get it sanded back down to 220, just lightly by hand with a hand block, and then I'll show you how we like to treat the boards and the materials we use, and we'll talk about the final process. We're getting close, guys. Okay, so after we popped the grain on the board, we went ahead and sanded it back down to 220 grit, just lightly by hand. We want to make sure everything's feeling good and smooth, and we haven't missed any areas. And another thing we went ahead and did was we got a damp rag, and we just are wiping all the sawdust off the board to make sure we're not going to transfer any of the sawdust into our oil bath we're going to put it in. Just a quick second before I show you how I like to apply the oil to my boards. These are the products that I prefer. I use 4 of these quarts of walrus oil because it's not just mineral oil. It also has coconut oil, beeswax, and vitamin E, and some other good stuff in there. All this stuff is available on Amazon. Just make sure you get the food grade stuff, whatever you decide to choose. I know a lot of people just use the mineral oil itself, but I prefer the other good stuff in there because it helps fill in some of the grain in the wood, and it really helps protect the wood and keep it looking shiny for a long time. Like I said, 1 gallon of this to about a gallon of this too. So we're going to cut for a second, and we're going to go over to where I put these in the oil at and show you how I do it. Okay, so we're over at our little vat that I like to keep the oil in, and once you've done this a few times, you'll notice that sometimes the wax and stuff will start to settle at the bottom of your pan you have here. Important to note is make sure you choose a pan that's big enough to accommodate whatever board size you're using. But I'll just give it a quick stir to help stir up all the good stuff in there, the different waxes and oils and stuff that's in there. Just stir it really good. If not, some of that stuff will settle to the bottom. Once you've done that, I like to take the board and I'll put it face down, whichever's going to be my face, and I'll just soak it in that oil for 4 to 6 hours on each side. And I'll just put the lid on it and let it sit for a little while, and we'll come back and check in a little bit. Okay, so we've allowed the cutting board to soak in the oil 4 to 6 hours on each side. I've already flipped it over once off camera. And what I like to do from there is I'll just go ahead and pull it out of the oil, trying my hardest not to make a huge mess. And I have a couple just a pieces of scrap lumber I've used. I've wrapped them in cardboard. That way it can be really soft on the board. It won't give you a bunch of scratches. And I will actually pull the board out, and I'll lay it on top of those carefully to where I don't scratch anything. And I'll just give the board an hour or so to drip dry, all that oil come off. And I like to use a little squeegee also. It's just for a windshield. It's nothing special. I think you get it at Walmart for a couple of bucks. And just to help push some of that oil off of there. I don't know if you can see it going in there or not, but it's pushing a good bit of oil off the board. So once you get to that point, don't put your oil away yet, because once we finish our final sanding, we're going to put it back in there just for a couple seconds to help just re-oil any areas that we sanded a little bit, and then we'll put the final wax on it, and this board will be done. So we're getting really close. It's looking really good. I don't know if you can see this color come through, but it's really pretty. So this board's looking really good. So let me get this dried off and back up on the bench, and we'll talk about our final sanding techniques and get this board ready to go to the customer. Okay, so we got the cutting board out of the oil. We let it drain off all the excess oil back into the reservoir we set it in, and we just towel dried it off and let it sit for a few hours to let it soak up everything it was going to, and we just wiped off the rest we could with a towel. Remember, we had this down to 220 grit sandpaper, so from this point forward we're going to sand everything by hand. We're going to just use the hand sanding block and a little mouse sanding block like this. We're going to start with 220 grit, and we're going to do all the surfaces we can with very lightly by hand. And we're going to work our way up to probably about either 800 or 1000 grit sandpaper, just to make sure everything's really good and smooth. For the sake of the video, I'm not going to show you all that because I got a lot of extra detail on this cutting board you wouldn't have. But we will do the same thing with our little juice groove rubber piece that we use to get in the grooves with. But as we go up with the grits, we'll also be doing all the detail at the same time, as well as the juice grooves. So you don't want to put a lot of pressure. You just want just tiny bit of, not even the whole hand weight, just lightly sand everything you can. And you're going to work your way up through the grits. It's already really smooth to begin with. This just gives it the glass-like feeling when it's all said and done. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and get all this detail sanded to, I'll probably stop at about 1000 grit on this board here because there's no epoxy. And we'll come back and we'll talk about putting the feet on it and our last final process we do right before we get ready to ship it. So we'll get back to you in just a minute. Alright, I just removed the cutting board from the oil. I let it to drip off a little bit, and we put it here on a bench on a towel, and I just pat it dry to make sure you get all the excess oil off of the board. The next thing we're going to do is I like to put this walrus wood wax. It just helps fill in some of the grain if you have some open grain, and it's really good for the board. It keeps it nice and smooth and looking shiny for a long time. If I can figure out how to do it, I'm going to put links to most all the products I use in the description below. But it's the walrus wood wax, and it works really well. I just have to apply it with just a little piece of a rag, get a generous amount on there, and you just kind of rub it into all the cracks and crevices, your juice groove, and all those areas. Once you get a good coating of wax on the board, you let it sit for about 15 minutes just to kind of soak in a little bit, and then you're going to buff it off with a clean rag. It doesn't take a whole lot. You just want to get a good little coating of wax. Okay, once you have it all applied to the board, just let it sit for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and buff it off. I'll see you in just a minute. Alright, the wax has had about 15-20 minutes to kind of soak into the board. All you got to do from there is just get you a nice, clean, lint-free rag and just lightly buff it in. You don't have to get too crazy, just make sure you buff it. It's going to help seal everything and give you a nice shine. You're pretty proud of what you got so far. So the next part is it's pretty critical. You want to get it right. We're going to be putting the feet on the cutting boards. I like to put rubber feet on the boards because over time with wood movement, you can get a board to bow just a tiny bit either way, and you want it to sit nice and flat on your counter or your customer's counter if you're building it for a customer. So that little jig I came up with to help me install my feet, it's just a piece of plywood. I cut it square. It's got a couple of pieces of scrap pine on the edges, and I put some blue painter's tape on the inside to help cushion it so it doesn't scratch my cutting board. But all I did was lay out a hole exactly 1 inch from each edge, and you can set it on the board to help register exactly where your feet are going to go on all 4 corners. I've already set my drill. I got my bit chucked up in there just the right amount to where when I put it through here, through the plywood, the thickness of the plywood, it's going to give me, I know you can't see it on the camera, but it sticks through my jig just enough for the depth of the screw. The last thing you want to do if you've made it this far is accidentally drill a hole all the way through your cutting board. So be really careful in your measurements. Make sure it's not going to go through a juice groove or anything you have. Just be really, really careful before you do this next step. But all I do is I'll hold this on the corner, and I'll take my drill and just drill it straight down through on all 4 corners. And if you're only making 1 cutting board, the jig is not as important. But if you're making a bunch of them for customers and all that, this will really save you a lot of time with measurements, and you know they're going to be exactly the same every time. The feet I like to use, I know you probably can't see them good, but they're just some little rubber feet available on Amazon. It comes to 100 in a pack with stainless steel screws, and they're just little rubber feet. I don't know if you can see it, and they come with a stainless steel screw. I got big old hands, so sometimes I have a hard time starting the screws, so y'all bear with me on this. But I'll try to get them started by hand, and then I'll run them in with a drill. With your chuck set at a low setting. If it feels like you're getting a lot of resistance, you need to use a little bit bigger size bit. This is hardwood, so you want to be careful you don't end up splitting your board. Pre-drilling is pretty critical. When I get 2 of them started, then I'll use my drill to run them in to where they're almost all the way down, and then I'll finish by hand. Be super careful you don't slip off the screw and end up dinging your board. So I'll just finish the last tiny bit by hand with a screwdriver just to make sure that they're snug and they're not sliding around. You do not want to over tighten them. Just enough to where they're not sliding. Okay. We'll turn the board around and we'll put the last 2 feet on. Okay, once you got your feet on, I like to just give it one last little final wipe down, get any fingerprints or anything off of it. And it's ready to be put into service. Just a few things to talk about before I let you guys get out of here for the night is care. There's a few products I like to use to help keeping the cutting boards look really good and clean and shiny, and to help protect them. It's important if you build this for a customer or for a family member or yourself, you really have to think about care. You cannot put these in the dishwasher. You want to hand wash them with warm soapy water, and as soon as they come out you want to dry them with a towel. Also, every time that I do wash them, I'll take some of this. This is another product I'll tell you about. It's walrus oil cutting board oil, and it has all kind of good stuff in there. It's got coconut oil, beeswax, mineral oil, vitamin E. There's all kinds of good stuff in here. But every time that you wash it, you want to make sure you put a little coat of oil on it. And the other thing I like to use is a little sponge. You can load it with oil and just leave it on your counter in your kitchen in the cabinet. And every time you wash the board, you can just pull this out, and it would already have a little bit of oil in there. If not, you just add a little bit on here, put it in the reservoir and squish it a couple times, and then you just apply it with a little sponge. Let it soak in a couple of minutes, and you just wipe it off. I know this isn't needed right now, but I'm just showing you guys how easy it is to take care of your board. It doesn't take any time at all. So a little thin coat, and then you wipe it down with a rag after it soaks in a few minutes, and it'll keep it looking brand new for its entire lifetime. Like I said, I don't need it, so I'll go ahead and wipe it off now. But care is everything. So the other thing is, every couple of months or so, we'll add a fresh coat of wax, this walrus wax, just to keep it looking its best. But it's important every time you wash it and dry it to go ahead and put a little bit of oil on there, and that'll help it last forever. That being said, our board's complete. I appreciate you guys sticking out to the end. Thank you for following Duran Woodworking and Designs. We had a lot of fun on this project, and we're looking forward to upcoming projects in the future. I will be doing a video showing how I created this tequila board, shot board on the CNC machine, and in the design software, and where we took it to the CNC. So follow along for more. I appreciate you guys watching. Please like and subscribe if you appreciate the content, so we can keep doing it. Thank you.